Hello and welcome to The Drug Trip. This channel is here to feed the curiosity of those who would like to gain an insight to the effects of various drugs and substances through user experiences and stories, with our main goal being to entertain and reduce harm and abuse. We post regular trip reports every few days, so if you do enjoy these, we would really appreciate it if you subscribed. And more importantly, we love to hear our viewers' thoughts, opinions and experiences, so please leave something for us in the comment section and we may use it in a future video. Enjoy and be safe. I initially woke up with the thought of taking a psychedelic on that day. All other days which I woke up like this usually ended up with having a spectacular trip. I had abstained from all drugs for more than a month, maybe apart from a couple of bowls and a beer spread out across that period. The day started out very gloomy and rainy. Don't get me wrong, I love rain, but this day was very dark and cold, and the rain did not help much. My plan was to take the psychedelics outdoors, maybe in a park, away from people. I was originally torn between 2C, T7 and mushrooms, both of which I had never tried before. In the evening, the sky eventually cleared, but it still remained too cold to allow for an outdoors trip. So I chose the mushrooms for their shorter duration, and also for the fact that I can easily procure more if the trip didn't go as planned. Whereas the dose of 2C that I could have very well been the last 25 milligrams of 2C that I will ever see. Therefore, I decided to save that for the perfect occasion. The problem is, I underestimated the mushrooms for two reasons. The first being that I imagined, due to my spiritual background and all my experiences with the sacred DPT, that it would be hard for me to have a bad trip. Since DPT is a mammoth of a psychedelic which I generally handle quite well, and the people I know who took mushrooms seem to imply that it was a rather easy trip. The second reason was that I didn't think 3.5 grams of mushrooms would do much to me, since I have a rather high natural tolerance to all tryptamines that I have tried. And a little bit of background about me. I live with my parents, who really would not appreciate their son doing drugs anyway. They were aware of my spiritual practices and are tolerant of them, so I had that on my side. I had always been able to take psychedelics with or without their presence and generally get away with it without any suspicions. This happened in that the psychedelics is either short-acting, like DPT, or long-acting, but does not cause much impairment or confusion, say for example 2CE, or a combination of both. Almost 2 years before this experience, I took 500 morning glory seeds on one occasion and went into a severe vomiting fit. That scared me and turned my trip very bad. I eventually had to turn to my parents for emotional help, and I was really lucky that they were understanding when I explained that this was part of my spiritual progress. The moral: do not underestimate the importance of a trip sitter. I've found parents are not very good with this role. In my MGS experience, I managed to somehow convince them that I was not poisoned, and as you will see in this report, I put my parents in a very stressful situation, and I feel it was very stressful and selfish of me to do so. The 3.5 grams were made up of 4 stems, 1 cap, and 1 unopened cap attached to one of the stems, a terminal which I have been told contains more psilocybin than the opened ones. They all had blue stains on them, and they were all eaten between 5 and 5:10 PM. They didn't smell bad, somewhat exotic. The taste, however, was not very encouraging, but it was bearable. I actually felt an alert as I was finishing eating the last stem. I walked around, and I was beginning to notice that movement was becoming typically more fluid. I then had a meal, which took me 45 minutes into the trip. I was now feeling definitely off baseline. From then, I began developing some anxiety. As time progressed, I became a little uncoordinated, and the anxiety grew. I really did not know why I was having so much anxiety. The psychedelic effects were not new to me at all, yet I was actually a little scared. The big thing on my mind, and the thing that I fixed on the most, was that my mother would be able to tell that I am on drugs because of my lack of coordination, and as my thoughts were beginning to get jumbled, I imagined I wouldn't be able to interact clearly with her. I decided to take 0.5 milligram of alprazolam because I was not sure that I was bound for a bad trip. I didn't care if it diminishes with the psychedelic effects. I was just desperate to get out of this discomfort. I then went to lie down. I was shivering. I didn't know if it was the cold or my anxiety. I went under the covers, but I still shivered severely. The problem is that I was not exactly intensely tripping. I was simply very confused and had irrational anxiety, and I did not like it. I was also feeling an uncomfortable body load that reminded me a lot of 5-MeO DMT. Of course, I did not like that either. With that, and despite the alprazolam, the anxiety grew and grew and grew. I figured I was now at the 2-hour mark. I was experiencing nothing but pure terror. I was literally afraid of everything, including myself. Actually, the one thing that frightened me most was fear itself. I had no real reason to be afraid, but yet I was. It was certainly not the ego death that scared me, as I have had my ego dissolved in the divine ocean of milk on DPT, while the world shattered. This happened many times before, and I have taken on other alien personalities on ketamine at one point. Therefore, I knew my fear was not out of some kind of identity crisis, yet I was afraid of being afraid, and also afraid of the fact that the alprazolam did absolutely nothing to help. Later, I learned that 0.5 milligram might not be enough, and even though I don't have much tolerance to the drug. I decided to seek help by talking to friends. I went on MSN. Yes, this was back in 2004. As I waited for it to sign on, I looked at the window and I saw a matrix of multicoloured dots. It was an interesting visual that persisted for a while. All the dots were mathematically perfect in size and arrangement. I also had a hard time typing because the letters on the screen all had red electricity buzzing around them, and I had very bad coordination. I found only 2 of my friends online, and both were geographically far away. One of them told me not to self-medicate with alprazolam since it could be a potentially dangerous combination. Now, I know that the most commonly used as a safe cure for bad trips is benzodiazepines, but at this moment, since I was so afraid of everything, I took his word for it. This experience of fear reminded me how pathetic I was. I told this to a second friend. He simply told me what a good person he thought I was, and that I didn't deserve all the crap that I went through this year. I found his comment extremely nice and started crying. I then went to lie down and I cried a lot. It was a catharsis for a very bad year. Mind you, I had been doing better for the last couple of months compared to the rest of the year, which was a very difficult one. However, I have a tendency to suppress, but not repress, negative emotions. I'm guessing that what this trip did was simply release these suppressions and breaking the dam. I experienced this year's worth of anxiety and despair in around 6 hours. Now that it was around the 4th hour, I was lying down, occasionally crying. The time between hour 3 and hour 5 seemed to be a blur. I lost track of it, and I do not remember all that happened, but much of it was spent lying down. I did not listen to music since I was afraid to listen to any music, and I did not get up since I was afraid of getting up. I remember crying a lot and feeling sorry for myself. The trip took a distinct sine wave form. I got periods of extreme euphoria and opiate-like body feelings, followed by the aforementioned fear with a lot of shivering and tension. The positive points, though fewer than my negative ones, were very significant. I remember the first peak. I was lying down, my body twisted, my eyes and mouth wide open, staring at the ceiling with a feeling of immense wonder. The ceiling was no longer a ceiling. I don't know what it was, perhaps a white sky with multicoloured stars and streams that kept moving? I'm not sure. I remember staring at the light, a lot of green eye murals, think Alex Gray's artwork. They flew out of the light and swirled around it, all in geometrically perfection. Since I was afraid of closing my eyes, the few closed eye visuals that I saw were faint and chaotic. After that euphoric peak came another fit of terror, and that was followed by a sense of, this is it. My body felt like it was dying, and I truly believed that I was somehow dying. In fact, I think this is what the big problem was. My ego did not die for some reason. I maintained my ego as I lost control amongst a lot of confusion and anxiety, and I don't know why. Perhaps I did not want to let go, because I knew I still had a long trip ahead of me. I did not want my mother to see me in that state and start freaking out. I also needed someone to be with me, but I had no one to contact. My only friend nearby was busy that day. Plus, as I thought of all the other people I know, I became afraid of them and found I had no one to trust. I felt like I could trust no one, and because my ego remained, I went into a rather psychotic state. I started crying and masturbating at the same time for some reason. I know for a fact that at this point I was just overflowing with love towards everyone, which is paradoxical with the fear. I felt like nothing mattered, but unlike that exhaled form of the same feeling I get with DPT after ego annihilation, here my ego was there. I knew that I was going insane. And for the first time ever on a psychedelic, I actually forgot that I had actually taken any drug. Actually, I didn't forget. I just somehow ceased to be relevant. I was convinced that I was going to be internally insane. This insanity extended between two lows of terror and one peak of euphoria. During this one peak, I felt God intoxicated, much like I do with DPT. I felt like I had superhuman powers. I had many twisted thoughts, including the idea of walking outside naked in public, because nothing mattered, and now I had become God and will die soon. However, in spite of this insanity, I had a grain of reason left in me, and that told me to stay as still and as silent as possible, and that would be the best way out. As the thoughts persisted, the terror remained, and instead of God, I was now possessed by paranoia. I stumbled into the bathroom because I really needed to pee. My vision was blurry, and I seemed to have some sort of nystagmus. As I was in the bathroom, I felt the same painful terror I felt throughout the trip. I was debating whether or not to go and tell my mother. I figured since the original source of the anxiety was my fear of my mother seeing me in this state, perhaps confronting her about it will resolve the anxiety. And so I stumbled downstairs and into the living room where she was sitting. I barely made it to the couch where I fell on it. I was completely paralysed. I remember hearing my mother freaking out and calling my name and asking what was wrong. I then remember seeing nothing, not black nor white, absolutely nothing. I was stuck in a moment where the divine and I were one. I saw nothing, heard nothing, and felt nothing. I then had a whiteout. This happened to me before on 2 previous occasions. I saw whiteness everywhere, whether my eyes were open or closed. Eventually I came back. I saw my mother holding my limp body and crying. I told her I was okay. She said she thought I had died. The whiteness dissipated into many hues of different colours, and again the eye murals that covered everything but quickly disappeared. It took me only a few minutes to recover from that state and reach a level very close to baseline, and I still do not know how that was possible. With most psychedelics, you peak. After you climb, then you slowly recover to baseline. Here I spent 5 hours climbing, peaked at the 6th, and very quickly returned to baseline in almost half an hour. I suspect it was less from the drug action and more from the psychospiritual reaction. As I came to, I simply told my mother that I was on morning glory seeds, and it was not hard to explain. I was then able to open up emotionally with her. I had had problems connecting emotionally to my parents over the last few years. I loved them, but I could not express it, and I felt very guilty about that. I was now able to talk very openly with my mother, and I managed to talk to them about very serious, outstanding issues. There were 2 things my parents wanted me to do for my future that I was very afraid of and previously could not do. The day after the trip, I found myself easily starting with them without fear, and happy at the fact that I am finally doing something that I know will make my parents happy, and that's after all they did for me. I would say that I have never felt so much fear in my life as I had during that trip. I really did not enjoy it, but yet, at the end, it was worth it. The only thing I regret is putting my mother in such a stressful position, but even that has shown me that she really cares for me. I had suicidal ideas before, and now I will never kill myself and put her in that situation for real. I simply cannot cope with the guilt. Although I said I will never touch mushrooms again during the trip, I now think I might consider taking them again in a few years' time. However, they definitely deserve much more respect than they are given on the street.